Hi, this is Jay Weldy with jrweldy.net. Today is Sunday, June 5th at 2016, and it's 8:11 a.m. And I'm rendering out a room at 3250 by 1780 pixels in Blender right now. And this is a room that I started yesterday. The actual time involved in creating this room was about an hour. And rendering at this resolution takes anywhere between 15 and 25 minutes on the equipment that I'm using right now. And I do have a Dell render server with 32 gig of RAM memory, and it's a quad-core processor, single quad-core Xeon processor. But I'm actually rendering this one on my iMac, which is a mid-2010 i7 27-inch with 8 gig of RAM memory. And it doesn't do too bad with static images. However, it is a complete dog on animation. And for that fact, so is my Dell render. It's nice because you can throw it over there and let it render for 3 days if you have to for a 30-second clip. I am in the process of looking for a Lenovo 900, what is it, a 300, I think? Or anyway, it's a hardcore workstation. It has the dual Xeon processors and ton of memory if you want to throw the money into it, and a couple good video cards in it. And I'm also looking at the HP Z820s. I really like the pricing of the 800s right now, but if I'm going to continue doing this to make a living in the future, I'll want to have something that isn't too terribly old. So the 820's a pretty good median point, I think, for using as a render server and workstation. Now, this is Blender, and it's version 2.77, which I believe is the latest. And I've got a bunch of add-ons to make my life a little easier with architectural rendering and interior design visualization, which is going to be part of the focus of my new business. I did close out my tech support business here in Delaware in March, the third week of March. My family's been going through a lot of health issues with our parents. My fiance's father unfortunately did pass away this past weekend, or last weekend, and we had the funeral on Friday. Great man, really, really an honor to have met him and been part of his family. So it's a great loss, unfortunately. My mother has had congestive heart failure on and off over the past 3 months, and we're trying to get that under control and make her a little more comfortable at 88. And I think she's doing pretty well, but it's a lot of stress. And then the stress of the technology business with the liability of data loss and hacking and things like that. I'm 55, and I was thrilled to really, with the way that the internet has changed and technology has changed, I really am thrilled to be closed up in that business. And so I do a little bit of consultation work for companies in Delaware, and I will be pushing graphic design in the form of business card design, 3D logos, and logo animations for intros and things like that within the beginning now, really. So I went into a self-trained crash course on Blender, Unity 3D game engine, and Maya, I believe, and started figuring out how to do this stuff. So if you're in the Delaware area and you need here's a blatant plug, if you're in the Delaware area and need a business card designed, or a logo, 2D, 3D logo, or you're a interior designer and you need visualizations of your designs, um, my website is www. the letter J, the letter R, weldy.net. And I'm going to go ahead and pause this so we let it render the rest of the way, and then we can look at the wireframe and the behind the scenes on this room. Thanks. So while this is still rendering, I want to address a couple of comments from two people that have looked at the room. And number one, this is really a exercise for me to do a fairly close scale, realistic looking visualization of an interior design. The layout is mine, the materials and the couches, the chairs, the columns, the artwork are all not mine. They're from architectural packages, from manufacturer OBJs, things like that. And I believe that that is completely okay to use in the scope of a project of somebody who's doing visualization for a interior designer or an architect. And they're readily available online, either paid or open source or free. And it saves time, and it's really a representation of the layout of the room. Of course, at some point in time, everyone that does this kind of work will have to learn how to do sculpting and use Bezier curves and Boolean modifiers and all the things that you would have to do to create unique pieces of furniture that may not be available to find online. The other thing is that the windows being opaque blue, I was told that makes it really look unrealistic. And I understand that, I get it. But again, in the scope of trying to do a room for a interior architect or architectural designer, something like that. Number one, unless I'm going to go to that room and take photographs out the windows and then go through the work of importing them in as an image as a plane and doing the lighting effects and that sort of thing, it's not going to be realistic anyway if I put a city skyline or a grassy field or something like that outside of the window. So to me, and I've always pretty much done this with the exception of one room render that I did early on when I was beginning to get into this, I always keep the windows opaque, and that way I'm giving my attention to the authenticity and realisticness of the room instead of the outside surroundings. So that's why I do that with the windows, for right or wrong. Now, I'm sure there's plenty of people who do this for a living that would say, oh no, you've got to have something out that window where it's just not going to look like a realistic render. But for my niche market in Delaware, for interior designers and people in this profession, that's all extra money and time in rendering. So number one, they're paying for the time involved in whatever I have to do to put an image in there. And then if they want super realistic, I'm happy to do it. But for the most part, this is more than acceptable for the niche market that I'm going after. I'm looking at being able to do interior visualization and rendering at an affordable price for these designers to be able to take to their client before the project begins to show them what their room will look like. And you can't say to an interior designer who's ultimately going to pass that dollar amount on to the client that it's going to cost $2,000 to render 2 rooms. It just doesn't work. not in today's economy, I think, anyway. I'm in Delaware. Maybe if I was in New York City or Philadelphia Main Line, and I would probably at that point be working for an interior design company on payroll, and then that's great. But as a outside contractor, you've got to keep your costs realistic uh, when passing that along to the end user. So, again, long-winded explanation of why I do certain things, but um, I think that's important. If you're going to talk about doing this for a job as a profession, you have to think of it in a businessman's eye, in addition to being the artist or the designer or the tech guy who wants all the bells and whistles and super realization and the light beams and the sun rays and things like that. It's not my niche, uh, honestly. So, although I am learning that kind of stuff, uh, to do vignettes and things like that, it's certainly not something that if I deem labor intensive that will go into a visualization of a room or a building. So just wanted to point that out. The reason I love this, after the background for me, and I'm rambling, but the background for me is when I grew up in Florida. In high school, I wanted to be a marine biologist, and really, back in those days, I mentioned I'm 55, so I was in high school during the late 70s. Um, the thing of being a oceanographic archaeologist uh, didn't even really exist. It wasn't on the in line for anything. Nobody was really doing that. Nowadays, that's a big thing, and if I had known about that, I probably would have become uh, a diving archaeologist. So, got out of high school and got into restaurant work, and restaurant work down in Central Florida and South Florida was very lucrative and made a good amount of money, and everything else went by the wayside. It wasn't until much later in my years that I got into technology, and got the opportunity to work for a company who grew very well in Delaware, and I was their IT manager, and learned how to do networking and databases and web-based applications and all of that, and the maintenance of it, and end user help desk stuff. And during that point when I was in school, I also did a lot of art in grade school and high school. And the thing I love about this 3D rendering and animation and stuff like that is that it kind of melds the two things that I really love the most is the technology of how to do this kind of stuff, from basically a gray screen to the ability to create things that I wouldn't normally have the resources and capabilities of doing, like a room like this, financially, physically, probably, and resourcefulness may not have that capability, or designing uh, a building. You know, I can design a building in this that just knocks your socks off. It's gorgeous, um, but I'm not an architect. And of course, you need to be an architect if you're going to do this. You don't want a roof crashing down on the people you build it for, of course. But or design a motorcycle or design a car in wireframe and then render it out, and it is just a beautiful design of your own. That art, that love of creativity for people that do this kind of work uh, and do it just as a hobby. If I were financially independent and didn't need to find a job, um, I would do this just for the fun of it, just for the love of the art of it. So that's definitely why I like doing this, and I hope I can, in the near future, make a living with it. I'm by no means an expert, and this is not a tutorial video or anything like that. This is just me after 4 months of diving in cold into the cold deep end of the pool, um, getting it to where I'm comfortable with saying, yeah, I could actually do this for a living if the market's out there. And you may have the same thought. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put this back on pause until this is done rendering. And then we'll just look at the skeleton of it. Okay, so the second photograph here rendered, and what I had done with this one was I changed the view angle on the room a little bit, and also put the columns in for some dramatic effect. So we are done that render, and I'm going to just go ahead and save it, and then we'll look at some different views on it here. Let me get out of this one. Alright, so there is the solid with the render window in between. I mean, honestly, Frank Lloyd Wright, what could that man have done with visualization software like this today? It's incredible, really, when you think about it. One of the pioneers of architecture in the United States. Alright, we'll go into wireframe. There's the wireframe, and let's hop out of that view. So there we go. There's the room in wireframe, and some stupid things that I've learned is if I'm going to do a room that's oblong or square, I don't do any walls until I do all the interior rendering first, and then I put the walls in last. So that's Blender. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. I'm Jay with jrwelding.net. Thanks.